Hello, welcome to Book, Chapter, and Verse. Hope you're having a good afternoon, evening, or night, whichever case may be. Remember, this program is on 3 times each week. Sundays at 4 o'clock is on, and then Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, and then Thursday night at 10 o'clock is also on. So if you miss it one night, one time, you can pick it up another time. Also, if you'd like to see a replay of it, just kind of remember the times it's on. And also invite your friends, family, and neighbors to perhaps watch the program if you find it very interesting, or even if you disagree with, that you can study again to see what's being said. We hope you'll have your Bibles as you look at it, and maybe a piece of paper so we can study together and write down any notes you may want or questions you may have. At the end of the program, I'll tell you how to contact me. I'm Dennis Tucker, and I'm the preacher for the West Side Church of Christ. What we want to do is we want to look at Genesis, the 25th chapter. In particular, at a lesson we learned from Isaac and Rebekah about child rearing. It's been said you can talk to people almost about anything except for politics and religion. Let me add a third thing in that category there of child rearing. It's just hard to really tell people how they need to rear their children. It seems like that everybody's an expert until it comes to rearing their children. I remember an old gentleman said that the one person or two people that knows best how to rear children are old maids and old bachelors. Those never had any experience of it. They seem to always know how you should rear your children. And so we look at this and we have to realize that honestly rearing children is hard. It's one of the hardest jobs you'll ever have. If you are going to have children, you still have to look forward to that. If you've had children, you know what I'm talking about. If you're a child, you don't realize how much effort and how much trials go into basically being a parent, the concerns about you. And so we look here in Genesis, the 25th chapter, we find that Jacob and Rebekah have children. And around verse 21, it said, "Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived." Now, let me interject here. Honestly, there are some couples who have trouble having children. They want children. Other couples just seem to have children naturally. They don't have to worry about it. They have as many as they want. And in both cases, that you have to realize children are a blessing from God, but also as parents we have been entrusted with a great responsibility. And so here they wanted to have children. And so it comes on in verse 22, "But the children struggled together within her. And she said, 'If all is well, why am I like this?' So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.' So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were 2 twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob." And it goes ahead and said that Isaac was 60 years old when she had his children, these 2 boys. And as we look at this, we have to realize there's something involved in verse 23 in particular, that's not just dealing with those 2 children, those 2 boys, but it's also talking about their lineage, of that which would come from them. As you go on in Genesis, we find that Esau marries, and from him came the nation of Edom. And so in one respect, this passage is talking about the lineage of Esau, and that lineage's relationship to the lineage of Isaac. And because Jacob, the second son here, that he would become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So we're looking down the road at what would happen between those 2 lineages for those 2 boys. But then also the passage points out to us that these boys, although they had the same parents, they were very different. In verse 27 of Genesis 25th chapter, "So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents." That one was what we may say is a man's man, an outdoorsman, a hunter, a fisher, somebody that liked to be outside. The other son was almost the opposite, somebody that liked being around the house, somebody that liked being close to the camp, and perhaps to his mom and his dad. And so you have these children are vastly different. As parents, we realize our children are in a lot of ways similar, but also that they are different. I have 3 children, and I can tell you each one, there's times you look at one and then the other, and you see the similarities. You see that, yes, they are brothers and sisters. But then there's other times you look at them and think, man, how much different can they be from each other? One is this way and the other one is that way. My family, as far as my siblings, I have an older brother, a younger sister. If you would compare us to each other, that I don't like the outfit, misfit about that group there, that I'm a lot taller than the others, and a lot of personality is different. And yet there are times when you look at us, you see the fact that we are similar. And so we have this quality, this trait talked about as far as these two children. But then as you go on in verse 28, we see a problem because of the differences in these 2 boys. And in verse 28 it says, Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now there's a natural inclination here of the dad with the child. Okay, you have this child that he wants to go out hunting. He wants to go out fishing. He's one that's the outdoorsman, and his dad was much like that. So we say, well, that's a natural feeling, isn't it? And then you have the other son who likes being around the camp, so that's Mama's boy there. That's the one that she takes a liking to. But you have to keep in mind that as parents, we don't have the right to pick and choose our favorites. That parents are not perfect. But yet we should realize that we should love our children the same. That doesn't always mean, by the way, you treat them exactly the same, because they're not the same. In this one, what may work with one child may not work with the other child. One child may require a lot more time than another child. One child may require more encouragement than the other child. But that does not mean that you should love one above the other. That each one of your children should be the same as far as the amount of love you have for them. And because you have this conflict, because you have the father loving one child and you have the mother loving the other child, that created by necessity a sense of rivalry, a sense of enmity between those 2 children. Have you ever known families like this? A family where the father did honestly love one child more than maybe the other children, or at least the other child they had. Of a mom that had her favorite, and that one there could never do any wrong, but the other children, or the other child over here, that she saw all the bad things he did, or that she did, but not the one that they loved the most. And of course, what happens is children realize pretty quickly, okay, I'm a favorite, and they also learn pretty quickly that they don't really like me, or that they pick on me, and I get blamed for everything. Our children see the way that they are treated. Sometimes they may not understand why, but they see partiality when it comes about. And so that's what we have here, is a partiality of love, of one parent loving one child more than the other parent, or more than the other child, the other parent loving the other child. And so again, I just point out that created a problem. And as we look today, we find that there are other problems parents have with their children. And one being obviously that of partiality just mentioned there. But we can mention other problems that parents have with their children. One is neglecting their children. Really not giving their children their time in particular. It's easy really to provide materially for our children. Now by easy, I have to say that and put a little preface here, because I realize that providing for the food, clothing, the health needs of your children is expensive. So somebody may say, if you think this is easy to take care of my children, you come pay my bills. I understand what you mean, that children are expensive. You have them, you have to pay the bills. But it's a lot easier in one respect to write the check than it is to spend time with the children. Growing up, I saw parents that had money, that had some wealth, and they could write checks for the children, but yet, how much time do they spend with them? And so we need to understand that our children need something more than the food, shelter, and clothing. They need us. They need our time in particular. One of the great misnomers, or one of the statements that sounds really good, but it really isn't true, and that is quality time versus quantity of time. And that is, okay, we're not going to spend much time together. We're not going to spend much quantity of time together, but we're going to spend a lot of quality time together. And so we're going to spend, we'll maybe spend 15 minutes with my child per day, and that's going to be really quality time. Well, the misnomer about that is, how do you have quality time without having some quantity of time also? I mean, can you tell your child, okay, we're not going to do anything together, say 15 minutes, but I'll tell you what, that's going to be my quality time with you. Really, that's a misnomer, because children need time. I don't know how you can speed up the relationship between parents and children, but they need us to be there with them. And yet, on the average, I saw this a few years ago, but the average parent, the average father in particular, spends less than 7 minutes a day talking to his children. Think about that for a minute. How much time do we spend reading newspaper? How much time do you spend watching television? How much time do you spend at the ball games or out mowing the yard or doing other things like that? And yet 7 minutes a day is what the average parent spends talking to their children. And that number just blows me away when I think about that. That we spend more time just watching television, honestly, than we do with our children by that average. And so we have to realize that's not going to cut it. That's not going to make it. That we have to be willing to spend time with our children, because when you look at the Bible, we find that fathers, again in particular, but this is not just limited to fathers, mothers also have responsibilities to the children, obviously. But the fathers have been given the specific responsibility of training their children. Over in Proverbs, the 22nd chapter, and verse 6, if you would. In the Bible there, Proverbs 22, verse 6, it says, "Train up a child the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Now, notice one thing, that is, children need training. You can not rear them. You can neglect your children. And this is one of the few areas that I can say this. But a parent can really be a bad parent, and there's nothing a child can do about it. I mean, short of abuse, where the government comes in and takes your child away from you, you can neglect your children and maybe think you're doing a good job, but your children really can't do anything about it. They can't fire you. They can't go out and buy new parents or get new parents someplace. You're their parents. And so here it said, now, they're going to need training, and that means instruction. That means an example set before them. And so fathers in particular have been given this responsibility in the New Testament, Ephesians 6 chapter and verse 1 there. Let me turn my Bible to the New Testament. Over Ephesians 6 chapter and verse 1. It gives, first of all, responsibility of the children to the parents when it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Then the second verse goes on and says, "Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise. They may be well with you, and that you may live longer in the earth." So children have responsibilities. But go on in verse 4, it says, "You fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." You want to have children that understand about God? You want to have children that you can talk to? You want to have children that are going to be good people? You have to train them to do those things. One of the tragedies today in our society, in our educational system, and I realize that the teachers, there are many godly teachers out there trying to do their best to teach classes as they should, but a lot of our education today is education without any sense of morality, without any sense of godliness at all. And what happens is we have trained children that can read and write and do math, and we have trained children that can use computers, but we have not trained children that know about God. And that's an abuse. That's something that's wrong about that. And so we find as parents, we need to make sure that we're teaching them about our God, about who God is. I turn my Bible over to 2 Timothy, the first chapter, and there in verse 5, and dealing with Timothy and the faith he had in God. In verse 5, he says, "Well, I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in the grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also." Paul does not say to Timothy, "Timothy, I'm amazed at your faith. I don't know where it came from." Now, Paul knew exactly where Timothy's faith came from. It came from his mother and his grandmother. It was taught him. In the 3rd chapter of 2 Timothy, the 14th verse, it goes on, but it said, but you must continue in things which you have learned and have been assured of, knowing them from whom you learned them, and that from childhood you had known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. From childhood, Timothy learned all about God. And then we go on in Timothy here, and we find that, again, talks about his faith later on, but all these passages points out to us that Timothy learned about God. Timothy was instructed about God, and that takes time to do that. So as parents, one thing, we're really not fulfilling responsibilities if we neglect teaching our children, if we neglect giving our children our time. But then the second thing is that a lot of parents make the mistake of overindulgence. Now, we can provide a lot of things for our children. In fact, my parents' generation, my parents grew up during times of depression. I grew up hearing about the stories of my mom and dad both, as they were in very large families that were poor. And my dad would talk about being in a house without running water. And again, that was common in that day and age. I talked about not having shoes to wear, not having food on the table. My mom talked about the time when they had a milk cow that died. And all the family cried because they knew that meant they were not going to have any milk for the rest, for a good time period, maybe the rest of that year. And one of them told us about going out and having a pair of shoes. They were playing out in the woods and took the shoes off and lost them. And they cried because there wasn't going to be money to go back and get themselves another pair of shoes. Their parents didn't have that kind of money. And so my parents grew up with a simple, I think, desire, and that is to provide for their children so that their children had a better life than what they had, materially speaking, at least. And they were able to do it. I didn't have a time when I didn't have shoes to wear. I can't remember a single time when we didn't have food on the table. Or I can't remember a time whenever we were sick, we weren't able to go to the doctor because we didn't have the money. We had all those things. And so our parents were able to provide more for us. And we in return have a lot of times the same desire, and that is provide a better life for our children so they'll have more things. And what can happen is after a while we provide them with so many things, but they don't realize what life's really all about. That I came across a list a while back, and this is kind of dated, I know, but a list was how to ruin a child. If you want to take a child to ruin that perfectly good child, here's the things they said to do. One is give them everything they want. You go to the store and the child starts crying for this here or that toy over there. They want this here. Just give it to them. That's a good step in how to ruin it. That way the child expects everything they want out of life. And the second thing is to give them their own phone, it says. Now I know that this sounds very radical today because everybody runs around with these cell phones. And I have cell phones. My wife has cell phones. Our children, our now teenagers, have cell phones. But we look at it and we have to realize that not all children need cell phones. Not all children need their own phone to use. That sometimes separates us from knowing what our children are doing. Another thing is give them their own car. Now again, I know that eventually our young people need cars to drive, but the idea is just give them a car so they can drive out there and do everything they want to anytime they want to. That's a good way of ruining your child. Another thing is teach them to expect others to give things to them. And teach them that if they want something, that everybody needs to sacrifice for them, that they have a right to everything they want. And if somebody doesn't give it to them, then they have a right to go and take it, because that should be theirs anyway. Those are some things that said that we need to do. I mean, we are doing, if we do these things, then we're going to ruin our children. And also, it's basically teach them to never work. Teach them they don't have to work. Everybody's going to work for them. And that's one thing I can say about my parents. They did teach us to work and to work hard, of the value of going out there and working. But a lot of parents don't do that today. And that is also to basically, don't teach your children to say thank you. When somebody does something nice for them or somebody gives them something, most parents try or should try at least to teach their children to say thank you, because it shows appreciation. for what others are doing for them. And then also, basically, a way to ruin children is to take care of everything they have. If they have problems, try to take care of it yourself. Don't expect them to do that. Don't teach them to share with other people. Now, those are kind of things, basically, as far as way to ruin your children. Overindulge them in all those things we just mentioned. And as you do that there, what you'll find is you'll have children that are going to be worldly minded. They're going to expect everybody to give everything to them, that they think they have a right to everything that belongs to everybody else, and they won't know really how to take care of things themselves. Over in 1 John, the 2nd chapter, 1 John, the 2nd chapter, verses 15 and 16, it warns us about the things of this world. And there in 1 John, 2nd chapter, verse 15, it said, "Do not love the world or things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that's in the world," and those here are the things listed, "the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is of the world." And so we need to teach our children that life is more than having things. That we're here not just to accumulate things, that there are going to be times they're not going to get everything they want. And that's a valuable lesson they need to learn. But not only that, but also some have said that if you want to basically make a mistake with children, then teach them that they are not responsible for what they're doing. Teach them, don't be responsible for what they're doing. Over in Proverbs, the 20th chapter. Let me turn the Bible over here. Proverbs, the 20th chapter, and verse 11. Again, Proverbs 20, verse 11. There it reads, "Even a child is known by his deeds, whether what he does is pure and right." Think about that statement for a minute, because a lot of times when children do things, when they say, "Oh, they're just little children, that's okay, they don't know any better." Now, they may not really know any better, but that's the time to start training them, start teaching them. But we need to teach our children they are accountable for what they're doing, even as children. And the law of Moses, a rebellious child, and I'm not saying that rebellious child was a 2 or 3-year-old child, but a rebellious child was to be taken out and stoned. There was a point where God said a child that's being rebellious should die. That child was being known by his deeds, whether what he was doing was good or bad. And our children need to learn, and they can learn pretty quickly as far as what to do and what not to do. You take a 4 or 5-year-old, they understand pretty quickly when they're in trouble, when they do things they shouldn't do. We should hold our children accountable for everything, for what they're doing. Again, don't blame everybody else for what your child is doing wrong. One of the mistakes that a lot of parents make today is when their children do something bad, they turn around and say, "Well, it's everybody else's fault. It's a fault of this child here or this teacher. If that teacher had been better, my child would have been better. Or if this playmate here had been better, then my child would have done better." No, we need to teach our children. They are accountable. They're responsible for what they're doing. When they get older and they get in trouble, don't bail them out all the time. Don't give them an easy way out. When they go to jail, they've come to that. Don't just get them out, but make them realize that they are accountable for what they're doing. But then another thing that we can do wrong in child rearing is to rebuke a child to anger. And when we read out Ephesians 6th chapter a few minutes ago, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The idea of provoking to wrath is basically getting that child where they're so angry because they know you're not treating them right, or at the point that they just think, "I might as well give up. I might as well not try, because no matter what I try to do, it's not going to please my parents, or it's not going to please my mom and my dad." Have you ever known a child like that? And in that situation, they either just get angry, explode, or they just give up. And we can provoke our children to wrath in a number of ways. We can do that by verbal abuse. Always yelling at them, always saying how bad they are, using vulgar language and talking to them. We can provoke our children to wrath by not letting them grow up. I've always tried to teach them like little babies, although they're getting up taller to the point they're not children anymore. They're closer to adults than children. And you try to teach them, treat them as children, you're going to provoke them to wrath. Or maybe also never letting them make mistakes. Children learn from mistakes. They need to make mistakes every now and then. And so we try to insulate them from mistakes. You may provoke a child to wrath. Never encourage them to try. Tell them, oh, that's too hard for you. You can't do that, son, or my daughter. That's just too hard. No, we need to let them try and encourage them to try, and encourage them even sometimes to fail at trying, because those are things that's part of growing up. And that's part of our job as parents, is to see our children grow up. And then honestly, physical abuse. We see that today around. It's heartbreaking when you stop thinking about all the cases in the newspapers, on television, of children that are abused by their parents. Maybe in the case of, we're not talking necessarily about spanking. There's a difference between whipping a child or beating a child versus disciplining a child. But we see cases where children have been abused, a case where they are killed even because of the physical abuse they're taking. We can mention here the abuse of abortion, which is the ultimate type of abuse of a child, of killing that child before it's ever born, ever has the opportunity or the right to live. And so parents that abuse their children verbally and also physically are making mistakes, are doing the wrong thing in service to God. And so look at this list here and think about Isaac and Rebekah. I came across another list, and that is this came from the National Association of Mental Health 10 Basic Needs of Youth. Let me maybe reword that, rephrase this, but this here is a committee that was dealing with what's 10 things our children need to grow up being healthy people, healthy adults. Here's some things I mentioned this. Number one is acceptance. And that is, be interested in what's important to your child. There's times as parents we have to rework at this, I know. There's times our children may be interested in something that we ourselves are really not interested in. But you know what? We need to be interested in it because it does interest our children. We need to have interest in what our children are interested in. So that's one thing. Be interested in what your children are interested in. Number two is control. Our children need to know that there are limits to what they can do. They need to know that they are responsible, and there's certain things expected of them. That control may be the idea of setting a curfew, of telling them that they are going to straighten up the room, of the time we're going to eat, everybody's going to eat together. But they need control in their life so they can understand what self-control and discipline is all about. If you want, again, to have a brat for a child, if you want to have a person that later on is going to be a rebellious person, then just don't ever set any limits for them. And you'll get what you want. You'll get that. Number three is faith. Children need to learn about moral standards. They need to realize that there are certain qualities such as kindness and compassion and courage and values such as telling the truth are important. And those are qualities they need to learn in their life. When they learn those qualities, then they grow up being happier children, happier people. Number four is guidance. That we need to teach them how to do things. That it's not us to tell a child, I want you to do something, but teach them how to do it. Provide the right example. Talk to them about how to learn to do things. Children need guidance. Number five is independence. Hard to do sometimes as parents. We like to have our children near us. We like to keep them safe, but our children need to be independent. We need to let them learn to do things by themselves. And as they grow up, they become more natural in their growth process. Number six is love. And perhaps this should have been first on the list, but let our children know. Let your children know that you love them. Put your arms around them. Tell them you love them. Show them that you love them by how you deal with them on a daily basis. Children need to know that they're loved. Now, even if they mess up, they need to know that they're loved by their parents. Number seven is praise. Tell them when they do something good. Tell them that's great. And because just as much as they need correction, they need discipline, they also need praise when they do things right. And so praise them. Number eight, protection. They need to know that there's somebody out there trying to take care of them, that somebody's going to help them, somebody's going to protect them from the bad things that happen in life as much as we can. I realize we can't always stop everything bad from happening to our children, but our children need to know that we're there for them, that we are going to do our best to protect them. So that when we hear all about all the bad things in the world around them, that they know that you are there for them. Number 9 is recognition. And that is talk to them, spend some time with them, and help them make decisions. When they have questions, spend time with them answering those questions so that they'll know that they come back to you later on, you'll help them. And number 10 is security. They need to know that you're going to be there for them always. One of the things about my parents, growing up, I realized that I never heard my parents talk about getting a divorce. There's times they may have been upset with each other. Many times they even have a little quarrel. But I never heard them and never felt as if our home was about ready to be destroyed. That we always knew that we had a home, that our parents were always going to be there for us. Children need that sense of security, knowing that their home is always going to be there. And so those are some things we need to do so that we have good children in the future. Hopefully this will help you if you're a parent dealing with your children, or if you don't get married, to think about this lesson and apply it later on in your life. Because God expects us to be the parents and to do the best job we can for our children. I do appreciate you watching the program at this time. I hope you'll tune in again. The Book, Chapter, and Verse is being brought to you by the West Side Church of Christ. Our building is located at 4201 Bent Tree Drive, Owensboro, Kentucky, 42301. Again, that address is 4201 Bent Tree Drive, Owensboro, Kentucky, 42301. Our time of services on Sunday mornings, we have Bible classes at 9:30, and then at 10:30 a worship service that will last roughly an hour. 6 p.m. Sunday evening, we come together to worship God again. And on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. we have Bible classes for all ages. We invite you and encourage you to come be with us. If you want to contact me or ask a question about this lesson or about other lessons, or a question about something that's happening in the world around us, then you can contact me by either writing to the Westside Church of Christ or by email at wcoc@bellsouth.net. Again, that is wcoc@bellsouth.net. And finally, visit our website. Hopefully you'll take the opportunity to look at the material on that website. Our website address is www.thewestsidechurch.us. Again, that is thewestsidechurch.us. I appreciate you watching. I hope you'll tune in again next week for another edition of Book, Chapter, and Verse.